Someone asked me recently, what excites you recently about Bitcoin? And I remain still very excited for all the original reasons. But yeah, I did mention, I think the amount of stuff, very cool, interesting stuff I'm seeing in terms of application development on the layer 2. And some of the speed at which some of those teams are spinning it up absolutely blows me away. I think some of the steps that are happening at the nation state, if they're navigated well, and that's just not El Salvador, although I'm going down there on a trip recently, pretty soon to learn, and spend some time there. If the El Salvador government does a few things right, they don't have to get everything perfect. But I'm kind of encouraged by this idea of them doing like a post-mortem. So in like software development, after every release, you always do a post-mortem where you look at, okay, what could we have done differently? What did we do right? What we did, just as a self-learning experiment. Doing that in certain communities is very, very hard. In politics, I think it's even harder. Because a politician standing up and saying, after 4 years in office, here's all the things I would do better or different, is usually not a politician that gets reelected, right? But, wouldn't it be great if they went out and said, a year in, 2 years in, here is everything we would do different or we want to improve on, around custody, around transparency of the balances, around, maybe some better... how some of the wallets are done and the custody rules say, we made a choice and it worked out well initially, or we had some hiccups. And here's what we learned and would do. Because that playbook could literally form the onboarding playbook for the next 4 nations that are working on it.
That's a really fascinating point.
And I think that level of self-analysis also allows you to detract against the IMF. It allows you to build political longevity into your position because you will go down in history as the people who actually not only figured out the playbook, but were honest enough with the world. Because when the IMF comes in and FUDs nations joining and points to a 101 and say, don't do this, right? Like we're gonna reduce your credit rating, or we're gonna have punishments, or you won't get access to IMF loans. So that's exciting. The stuff Blockstream's doing, Blockstream has done some really exciting stuff, and just the whole idea of them as the Cisco of Bitcoin, I think was underappreciated for a long time.
Yep.
But now with some of the work, both technical, but also on like the Bitcoin bond, because if we get the financialization formula worked where the Bitcoin community can offer the world tokenized bonds that have Bitcoin incentive, what that does for changing economics, you could literally go into a small town and say, you know what? Instead of doing a 25-year zero coupon municipal bond, which is, if you're familiar, that's how usually towns finance a lot of public goods projects. You go in and say, you know what? You could do an citizens economic incentive bond where every citizen who moves to your country gets $5,000 or $10,000 worth of Bitcoin every year, provided that 5 to 7 years from now, they're still here. And you could finance that entire thing with Bitcoin. And now you have you're orange pilling cities and towns left, right, and center because you've changed how they raise money. You've changed how they derive tax revenue. You've provided economic empowerment. And you can go to some places where the average income is 25, 30,000 or 35, where they're dealing with drug addiction, they're dealing with poverty, they're dealing with job loss, and literally come in and do, the last example we saw of this was native casinos. And when they came in, even though the casinos had some very negative impacts because gambling sometimes does that, but it would provide an entire community in some cases with enough reserves or enough annuity and revenue share that they could send all their citizens to go to university who previously were denied access. And so I think there's some of these things, those are some of the big ones that really excite me that are going on.
What about you, Danny? What excites you most in Bitcoin?
Oh, I don't know. I think the big thing that's been a topic this week has been the mining, like the second order of effects of mining, securing the grid, and that fascinates me.
Yeah, so there's 2 conversations that came up this week. There's the one specifically here where we are now in Texas with ERCOT. Have I got it right now?
ERCOT.
ERCOT. How
Exciting work.
yeah, exciting work. Margot Paez, who we had on, wants to do a research paper on looking at how miners are integrating with the grid to bring a bit of stability to it. Something I don't believe Satoshi ever planned for, but is one of these fascinating things that's come out of it. And then Matthew Pines discussed how the semiconductor industry is being forced to rethink foundries due to the risks with Taiwan, and there is a need for mining chips, and perhaps that's going to incentivize the build out of new foundries in other countries to support miners. And I want to know what's all the future industries that are going to get changed by Bitcoin that we don't know about yet, because there's going to be other things.
Yeah. Well, I find both those fascinating, by the way. And I think like energy and chip advancement, I mean, it was something that even at the beginning of Blockstream, I would talk about, and it would just shock. Bitcoin literally self-funded the advancement of ASICs from like 40 nanometers down. They were one of the earliest adopters of ASICs. And yes, other industries were, like mobile phones and other things were riding that same wave. But all of those had like massive amounts of venture capital. This was just self-funded by individuals who were deploying the best new chips they could. And seeing that was fascinating as we moved into ASICs. Bitcoin has also funded some of the most incredible advancements in crypto and computer security, right? Because now instead of just protecting your family photos or your email, you actually have a bearer certificate digital instrument, and it's forced the world to finally catch up and say, how do we actually build secure computing? Which is critical for the future because, the actual trust and the actual issues around AI, around governance are going to require a massive investment in computer security that Bitcoin has funded and done. But yeah, I also think some of the industries that may be most exciting are ones that we can't think of now because they won't be industries directly like one-to-one affected. But there are certain clear applications. Like I think we'll be able to deal with getting rid of spam. A lot of the identity issues online when we actually have ubiquitous lightning payments and the idea of, doing some sort of hash cache, which is what it was originally designed for. But, those are all very exciting. But the ones I'm most excited about or hopeful for, hopefully, are the ones that Bitcoiners will create with the economic freedom.
Yes.
So, the Bitcoiner who goes out and says, you know what, we can now afford to tackle this big society issue because thankfully I was into Bitcoin very, very early. And that's where my hope for Bitcoiners is, or those who have enjoyed some economic benefit from Bitcoin, is that they have that sense of gratitude and they have that sense of wanting to reinvest. And that doesn't just mean reinvest in Bitcoin, but finding issues you care about passionately, because, the same way in the past we had industrialists, we had Carnegie, we had Rockefeller. A lot of their wealth creation wasn't exactly, innocent, right? The old adage was show me a massive fortune and I'll show you a massive crime. Because some of those, very large, very wealthy industrialists used monopolistic power. They used, in some cases, violence. In the case of, Standard Oil, but some of those people reached a point in their lives where they were like, "Okay, I can't take it with me, so I'm going to at least do some image rehab by going and building some things." I don't think our generation and the people enjoying Bitcoin wealth need to be like that and should ever be ashamed of how they made their money by getting into something they believed early, by having, diamond hands and sticking around when everyone else was afraid. And as they enjoy that economic prosperity, as we see Bitcoin's price climb to, a few more orders of magnitude higher than it is, I think you'll see a new class of Bitcoin millionaires, 100 millionaires, billionaires, who are now sitting there saying, okay, what good can I do with this money? And how can I benefit society in ways that they believe in? And I'm hoping that some of the effect of that will also start to have a trickle down. The same way we saw some of the best entrepreneurs, you know, were created in kind of Silicon Valley, the density of intensity, because people did have success. They were young enough not to want to retire. And they're like, well, if I did it once, I'm going to do it again. And, you know, that's what gave us kind of this, you know, pay it forward, reinvest culture, willingness to mentor. And I think, or my hope is, we'll see that on a very broad scale globally around Bitcoiners and some of what they choose to do with their wealth.